asked the kid I was babysitting. "What do you think lurks out there in the forest?" He responded with, "My mother has been babysitting all summer in order to make some extra cash." At first, I just asked around at school if anyone needed a babysitter for their siblings or if they knew anyone who could be interested. I started babysitting kids whose families I knew, but eventually I needed more money, so I put up an ad on Craigslist. It wasn't long until I got a response. The family lived in the suburbs, but what bothered me was how close to the woods their house was and the fact that they didn't have any neighbors. I got a bit freaked out at first, considering the fact that they were strangers with a cabin in the woods, but decided to push through the fear for the money. The house was a cozy little cabin, clean, with a garden in the back that had a gate which led to a trail in the woods. They had little lanterns hung out in the garden and a swing all the way in the back. The living room had a large window that faced directly the forest, and during the day the room was bathed in sunlight. The kitchen was right next to it, with its counter facing another huge window, surrounded by pots and vines and stupid signs like, "Home is where the family is," or "In this house we say sorry." And so upstairs, they only had the 2 bedrooms. The attic was a tiny space whose window faced the woods, too. The kid was pretty quiet. Honestly, I neither liked or disliked him. I tried to form some sort of opinion, but he just didn't stand out in any way. He wasn't mean or stubborn, but he wasn't a sweetheart either. He must have been around 5 or 6, so I would just put him to bed quickly and then snoop around the house. But I've always been curious about whoever hired me, and I know it's not exactly recommended, but I would just go through people's stuff whenever I felt bored. It must have been around midnight that night when I slowly pulled out one of the drawers in the main bedroom. This one had all types of trinkets: coins, notebooks, pins, buttons. This family liked to collect useless stuff and let it hang around the house, and I liked to explore it. As I was studying this little ceramic statue of a horse, I moved it around, noticing the moonlight hit its porcelain from different angles. I debated whether to just take it or not. Would they even notice? My chest tightened and my mouth opened. The horse was no longer bathed in moonlight because this huge shadow had covered it and was dancing on its porcelain. Looking around a bit, I noticed the shadow took up half the room. I could not make out the silhouette, or what could have made it. It just seemed so unexpected that fear crept up to me and froze me. Someone was at the window. I know it could have been a bird. That's the rational explanation. And I could have solved all this doubt by just looking up. But I didn't. Because what if it wasn't a bird? I stood still for so long, not knowing what to do, until it passed and the horse was lit up again by the moonlight. I breathed a sigh of relief and put the horse in my pocket. I didn't know at the time, but that would have been my first contact with it. Something made me stop snooping around and just get downstairs. I turned on the TV and curled up on the couch. At one point during the night, I heard creaking upstairs. Oh, it shouldn't have freaked me out so bad, but I still got scared, so I went to check it out. The house was dark and quiet, and the 2 bedrooms facing each other were empty. Empty. Where'd the kid go? "Jason?" My voice pierced the silence, and I felt like an intruder destroying the quiet of the night. "Jason? Where did you go?" I kept having the feeling of being watched, so I turned around, fixated on the attic door, which was now opened. My instincts kept telling me to just leave, but my head, now spinning, refused. What if we had an intruder? What if he'd taken Jason? If I just looked up at the window when the shadow passed, now I'd know what I was dealing with, if I just had the courage to face it. My voice sounded a lot weaker than the first time, but I still had to try. "Jason?" "Yeah." The response was almost immediate, and coming from the attic. Odd. What was he doing there? I put my foot on the first step of the stairs. "What are you doing there? It's really late. Your parents are going to be home soon." Step after step, I tried to readjust my eyes to the darkness. The attic was really dark compared to the rest of the house, and I could make out a ray of light that traced out this tiny silhouette. I could make out a ray of light that traced out this tiny silhouette. I'm like, "This is the wind you're breathing louder." And, "Jason, are you there? What are you doing? You're freaking me out." I finally reached him and put my hands on his tiny shoulders. but he didn't respond. He was just staring out the tiny window into the woods. "What's going on?" I asked. "What are you looking at?" I sat next to him and stared out the window at the woods. There was a portion of the grass beginning from the house, pierced by trees. The farther you went, the denser the trees were, until you'd discover you were completely surrounded by the woods, unable to see the sky from how tight the branches closed around you. The forest commenced from the garden and swallowed the horizon like a dark mass, blending with the sky. The window framed this darkness, this suffocating emptiness, and made me feel as if we'd reached the end of the world, and had we dared to venture into the forest, we'd just fall over the face of the earth. And there stood Jason, just staring. "What are you seeing?" He just wouldn't answer, so I decided to find out by myself. Studying the scenery, nothing particular stood out. Of course, I just needed to pay more attention. Yeah, the more you looked, the more movement you saw. Birds, animals, even the wind thrilled the branches and the leaves, the grass swaying gently. And then the shadows were the next thing you noticed, these forever moving stains on the ground. I could have stared out there for years. Maybe that's why Jason wasn't moving. There's just something about the night that keeps you up. "What do you think lurks out there?" I asked him playfully. "Where, in the woods?" "Yeah, my mom." I blinked a few times. That was unsettling. I mean, kids say weird stuff, but why would he respond to that? Was that a "your mom" joke? Was he trying to be funny? "What do you mean? What does lurk mean?" Lurk means, well, when you wait or move slowly in the darkness because you don't want to be seen. So, like hiding. Yeah, but you're lurking when you also want to do something bad. Just how animals lurk before they attack. Or monsters, I added, trying to scare him. "So, what do you think lurks out there in the forest?" "My mother," he responded once again. My body tensed up. "That's not funny." "I don't want to be funny." "Why would you say that?" "Your mom. That's an old joke and it stopped being funny a while ago." "I'm not joking." Yeah, let's go to sleep. Your mother can't be lurking out there. I saw her and she's pretty nice. I don't know what she told you, but she doesn't eat people. She's out with your dad now and they're going to come home in a few hours. If they find out you aren't sleeping, I'll get a lot of shit for it." "Shit? Don't tell your parents I said that. Come on, let's get down." I'm telling the truth. "What, is she a vampire?" You know, someone was standing at the window earlier. I didn't really care that much about what I was saying because in my head, everything had a logical explanation. Jason, however, widened his gaze. "Yeah, that could have been her." "Stop! I'm serious." "And what does she want from us? Does she want to eat me?" We were now in his bedroom, and I had tucked him into bed. I had my back to the window, facing the hallway, which had now become way creepier than expected. "She doesn't want to eat you. That's so great. I taste horrible. Good night." I tried to stand up and leave, but he grabbed me. "Wait, don't go. Look at me." "What now?" "I want to tell you about this dream I had. It's a dream, it woke me up. But you have to pay attention, okay?" So, in my dream, I was in the garden, and I was thirsty, and you were there too, and you tried to leave, but there were a lot of bushes around, and you got lost. And I found this puppet who was giving me the dream, and that puppet said, "Listen, I sent you here." I hate it when people tell me about their dreams, but I sat there listening, facing Jason with my back to the window. Not because his story was interesting, not because I liked being there, because while he held me there, his eyes kept darting to the window, and I'd seen the shadow cover his face because he'd insisted I looked at him, but in reality, he didn't want me to turn around. So I listened until he abruptly finished his story when moonlight reached his face again. "Thank you for the story. It was really interesting." "You're welcome. Good night." Hey. I spent the next hour in the other bedroom, fidgeting with the little porcelain horse. This kid was a lot braver than I thought. In the silence, I kept trying to make out distinct, unfamiliar sounds, but didn't succeed. The house had fallen asleep and the night had become uneventful. His parents arrived soon after that. I put the horse in my pocket and went downstairs to greet him. "Was he good, Keith?" "Yeah, the best." "Don't worry. I studied both of them head to toe, their clothes, mannerisms, facial expressions, but mostly the mom." "Were you good?" asked the dad jokingly. "I hope so," I responded. They wanted to drive me home, but I insisted on taking my bike. I closed the door behind me, but instead of leaving, I headed to the backyard. I just wanted to see something. Climbing on the fence, I made it on the roof of the porch, right next to the bedroom window, hoping to see some signs of something, anything. The window was covered in scratches, but nothing gave out what had been there. I stood there for a while. I don't know why. The parents had gone to sleep, and Jason was probably asleep in his room too. I studied the garden from that angle, then the woods, as quiet as a mouse, then the room where the parents were sleeping. After that, I don't remember how I got home. I don't even think I took my bike, just ran frantically until my legs bled. I didn't even scream. I didn't look around or stop, just ran until I reached my house and banged on the door. My mother answered, annoyed, and I ran past her right to my bedroom, covered myself in my blanket, and started typing this. Because while I was watching the parents sleep, something had caught my eye. In the hallway, what I had though to be a coat hanger moved all of a sudden. It had been standing there so still, I hadn't even bothered to notice it until it disappeared out of my range, then appeared again. This bony, twisted silhouette dragged itself into the bedroom and stood right next to the bedroom and stood right next to the mother who was sleeping. It looked uncanny, like a human who'd starved to death, with wide eyes and arms so long they trailed behind it when it walked. It just stood there, watching the parents, then lifted a bony finger and started counting. I stood there frozen, watching this horrifying show, forever scarred in my head. It kept counting and counting and counting. I was so scared to move that I would have watched it forever. It wasn't until something else happened that made me break into this exhausting run. It saw me. So that was the first story, a tragic tale that still leaves us with more questions than answers. But now let's dive into something completely different. Our next story takes us into the eerie world of the internet, where one seemingly harmless click led to something far more sinister. This story is titled, "I Found an Extremely Bizarre Internet Survey." Let's begin. Nobody knows what rock bottom truly is until they've hit it. Being abruptly fired from a job you've worked at for the past 10 years, and then catching your girl cheating on you with your replacement really makes a man think, "Oh, my student loans aren't even paid off yet. What a shit show this life is." After a rather boozy night that consisted of sending out about 4 dozen resumes and horrendously written cover letters, I passed out. When I woke up the next morning, I decided to at least try and make some money at home while waiting for an interview. At that moment, I thought that the best way to go about it was completing those internet surveys that yielded $5 Subway gift cards and other shit like that after about an hour of answering questions. I mean, I didn't have any other marketable skills that could have yielded immediate income. It was either that or wasting the day away playing computer games. At least I wouldn't have to pay for food. I did these surveys for about 5 hours before nearly passing out. It was way more excruciating than I'd originally anticipated. At the end of those 5 hours, I'd accumulated about $45 in cash and gift cards, $9 an hour. Not like I was making much more than that before. I was about to close my laptop up for the day and head to a bar in an attempt to drown out my melancholy when I first saw it shouldn't even have been noticeable, but for one reason or another, it was. At the bottom corner of the website that I was on existed a tiny singular advertisement. Maybe it was the simplicity that got me. Plain black letters in a tacky font that read, "Surveys for Cash," overlapped a completely white background. At least they were direct with the message. One more couldn't hurt, I thought. At least start one with a message. One more couldn't hurt, I thought. Might as well scrape together a little bit more booze money before heading out. I sat back down, clicked on the picture link, and prepared myself to grind through some more painstaking inquiries. The first few questions were simple enough. I guess they weren't really questions, but more data collection. My name, age, and occupation. I thought it was kind of weird that they also asked my height and weight, but it wasn't unheard of. The first real question was a different story, though. I must have stared at it, eyes wide and mouth agape for God knows how long. What the actual hell? In plain English, this is what popped up on my screen. How strong is your urge to currently look behind you? There were 5 options below, ranging from not at all to overwhelming. There was no feasible reason why I should have been afraid at that moment, but I was. I tightened my breathing, trying to make out any subtle noises behind me. There were none. After maybe about 5 minutes, I worked up the courage to look. There was nothing. I sighed in relief and scoffed at myself at the same time. This must have been some kind of joke. However, I decided to entertain it, answering neutral and clicking on to the next question. This is what it read. Why would you look behind you? I smirked. Funny, before simply typing in "I don't know" in the response box and once again clicking next. Jeff is always smart when it comes to stuff, said Gibbons' brother. And while this teaches some of these skills, I guarantee you'll learn behind the scenes. This is what it read. Why would you look behind you? I smirked. This is what it read. Why would you look behind you? I told you this was a fun one too. This was the third question. You're on a plane. Apart from you, there is only one other passenger who is sitting somewhere behind you. At some point, you get up to go to the washroom and find that the man is gone. You check to see if he is in the only bathroom on the plane, but he isn't. What do you do? Again, I must have stupidly stared at it for nearly 10 minutes. Was this some kind of obscure personality test? I mean, it must have been, right? Right? I put the same answer that I used for the last question. I don't know. It was true. I didn't know. How was I supposed to answer this shit? I clicked next again, now more intrigued than anything. The fourth question went like this. You wake up in the woods unfamiliar to you. It's nighttime, and the moonlight provides you with only slight visibility. About 30 feet away from you, there's a small, dimly illuminated cabin. The door's open, and a smiling woman is motioning for you to come in. Do you go? Explain why. This question wasn't necessarily weirder than the last one, so my conjecture that this was some kind of odd personality test was still feasible. The person painted the impression that Williamson looked like a rascal the entire time, and the small details were strange to say the least. This question wasn't necessarily weirder than the last one, so my conjecture that this was some kind of odd personality test was still feasible. I actually make an attempt to answer this one, something along the lines of going into the cabin because there's simply nowhere else to go. Once again, I click next. Probably shouldn't have. The questions started getting fucked up. They weren't too gory or explicit, not anything like that. They were just stranger, weirder, more psychologically disturbing. If you're wondering why the hell I kept going, I can't really give you an explicit answer to that. I just felt like I had to. It was an esoteric, creeping sensation that I can't quite explain away, but I could never shake it. So I just went on. Some of the questions that stood out were, suppose that you wake up one night to find an elevator in your house. During every midnight after that, it opens up for 5 minutes, revealing an exact copy of yourself that gets progressively more injured as time goes on. You keep living like this, or do you enter the elevator once and end it all? I would say the majority of people that we know. And you're in a hotel room but are awoken by a rapid knocking at your window. You peek through the blind, seeing what appears to be a man missing both his eyes. He puts his mouth to the glass and tells you to kill the woman in the bathroom immediately. Do you listen to him? This was one of my least favorites. You are watching home videos with your mother. One of the tapes include footage of her being murdered by a masked intruder. And your mother simply laughs at this footage without saying anything. In your opinion, is this a cause for concern? In addition to this insanity-inducing shit, there were some rather disconcerting events happening in real life as well. I received a knock at the door about 30 minutes in. I looked through my peephole to find a guy standing there, frantically shaking his head and mouthing no while making direct eye contact with me. He looked terrified. Obviously, I didn't open up. I received about 10 phone calls from somebody named The Auditor on my caller ID. They left a message every time, but each one was just a recording that consisted of somebody saying numbers through heavy static. Actually, it sounded more like screaming, now that I think about it. About an hour into this thing, and I was on the verge of a mental breakdown, I was petrified of looking behind me, even though there was no indication that anything should have been there. So I heard some soft scratching coming from my vent at one point, so I moved my couch over it. Eventually, I reached what appeared to be the end of the survey. However, it wasn't a question. It was simply a statement. Don't let them in. They're not to be trusted. Almost as if it were on cue, I heard more knocking at my door about 5 seconds after reading this. As slowly and silently as I could, I moved over and looked through the peephole once again. It was a different person than the one I'd seen earlier. She was a woman looking to be in her mid-20s. She was wearing a thick blazer despite it being around 90 Fahrenheit outside. She was also wearing sunglasses, so I could never really tell where she was actually looking. My mind went very chaotic, thinking about how to figure how to relax, when to take naps, how to relate to what the people upstairs. And she eventually took a piece of paper out of her pocket and slipped it under the door. I looked down and read it. It's lying. Leave your apartment immediately. It's been about half an hour since. I can't bring myself to look at the computer screen, nor at the woman outside. She's still there. I can see the shadows of her feet from underneath my door. I heard my bedroom window open a few minutes ago, but I've since jammed the door shut with a chair. I can hear some kind of distorted muttering coming from behind it now. Slurred things like the cow dolls and Luz sexier. But I haven't been able to memory the name of that rodeo place. Maybe rock bottom wasn't so bad, but what the fuck am I supposed to do here? So those are the stories for today. Personally, I found both fascinating, but the first one definitely had a darker, more chilling vibe. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. And if you have your own story to share, feel free to send it to me via email. The address is in the description below. And what more? Click on the video popping up on your screen now to dive into even more eerie tales. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Stay safe and stay spooky.